Hello, welcome to our second episode. And today we are going to talk about creatine. Creatine is arguably the most popular sports supplement available to date, and for a good reason. Aside from it being a critical molecule, our body needs and uses it. It's also one of the safest, most effective supplements out there. Because of its popularity, it comes with a lot of myths, and we are here to bust them with science and support you in making informed choices on why, how, when, or how much to use creatine. This episode's one-stop shop of evidence-based information is on creatine's use on athletic performance. So we're going to jump into its history, and I'm going to hand over to my co-host, Jess, for a little bit of historical journey of creatine.
Yeah, good morning. So creatine, it was first discovered about 2 centuries ago and has undergone tremendous research and a ton of, I will say, like real life testing. The number of people who are still confused about creatine today is astounding. There's so many myths out there. So I know we're looking forward to talking about some of the common ones we hear and give you the data behind it. But first, I wanted to give you a little bit of history. So creatine was actually isolated first in 1832 by a French scientist from skeletal muscle, and he named it after the Greek word creus, which means flesh, which was really interesting because shortly after he discovered it, a German scientist confirmed that creatine is actually a regular component of our flesh. Creatine monohydrate, which is probably the most common form, was the first used in sports as a supplement, and it's also the most well-researched form. So when we're talking about creatine today, we'll be talking about the science behind creatine monohydrate. So if you look on the back of the label, it will tell you the form of creatine on there. So just a little tidbit on that. But Nilhan, why don't you give our little listeners into a background of like what creatine is and why it's so important for our bodies?
Sure. So as you said, it's naturally available in our body. And creatine is a naturally occurring water-soluble substance that helps recycle energy, ATP, from basic biology and the Krebs cycle. This is very important in our energy metabolism within muscle, heart, and brain tissue. So this is where creatine is available in our bodies. Our bodies can synthesize creatine from a reaction involving the amino acids, arginine, glycine, methionine in the kidneys and liver. And exogenously, creatine is primarily consumed from meat. So this is where we get our creatine from, which is out of our body, or we can use it as a dietary supplement. Upon ingestion, creatine converts into ATP, which cells use as their energy source. So it's very important to understand that creatine is very, very important in our energy metabolism. So once again, mentioning that. Supplementing with creatine boosts the amount of energy available in our muscles, heart, and brain. You mentioned creatine monohydrate, and there are many types of creatine, and it seems like every day a new form of creatine appears on the market, claiming to be the next best thing. So let's see what's next is coming. But creatine monohydrate is the most basic form. This is the one that has most research, most studies about, and this is the most credible one. But what are the other creatine forms that are available in the market? Creatine hydrochloride, creatine nitrate, phosphates, CEE, this is creatine ethyl ester, and there is crealkaline. So this means creatine is conjugated, it's bonded with different types of molecules so that it is going in your body relatively easier in different tissues. So this is how the system works. But let's focus on creatine monohydrate for the purpose of this podcast. Most studies show that ingestion of these other forms have less physiological impact than creatine monohydrate on intermuscular creatine stores, so the stores in our muscles. And again, the other forms have less impact on performance, and any performance differences are related to other nutrients that creatine is bound or co-ingested within supplement formulation. So if you're seeing an effect, it may be also linked to what's available in the supplement. This makes sense given that these other forms contain less creatine per gram than creatine monohydrate, and 99% of ingested creatine monohydrate is absorbed into the blood, then taken up into muscle, and then it's excreted in urine. So you can understand that whatever you ingest, that is your body benefits, almost 100% of it. All products are not without risks and side effects, and we have to be transparent, and we want to give you complete information. That's why we would like to cover the possible side effects. So I'll give the floor back to Jess to go around the side effects of creatine a little bit.
Thank you for the like biology 101 kick back to high school. When in the Krebs cycle, I never thought like in my years of high school I would be going back in my 40s to talk about the energy cycle and where creatine and ATP and all that, but it really is like a full circle as to why it's so important. But we do have to cover the side effects, like you said, because everything is not without risk. And it's something as an athlete and a consumer that you do have to be aware of and make that risk benefit analysis. So the most common side effect with creatine is basically kind of like a water retention. And this usually happens in the first 3 days. And we'll go into this a little bit more later as to the effect of this, why it may happen, and that it will go away. But basically your body's just holding on to more water. It's not a bad thing. You probably need it. So we'll dive into that a little bit more later with one of our myths. One of the other things that I hear or see people experience is a little bit of diarrhea or stomach upset. And that usually just means that they're taking too much creatine. Evidence kind of shows that creatine supplement is relatively well tolerated in doses of like 3 to 5 grams per day. Some people, and we'll kind of get into this again in dosage, take a loading dose, and sometimes those loading doses can cause a little bit of GI upset. So that's kind of why people experience that. I usually just recommend backing down the dose. Creatine does breaks down basically into creatinine. So those with liver and kidney disease, you should definitely always speak to your healthcare provider before starting taking creatine supplements. There's probably 500, probably more than that, peer review publications on creatine supplement. So it is surprising that questions regarding their efficacy and safety actually still remain. So we're going to break down some of the common myths. And Nilhan, you want to start with the probably number one myth that we hear from most people using creatine?
Yes. So the number one myth is creatine causes massive water weight gain. So let's get into that. So is it true or not? Some of it is true, but mostly in the initial days when you start using creatine, and especially with those doing high loading doses. Like if it's 20 grams a day for a week, 5 to 7 days, this may initially cause water retention. Unfortunately, based on multiple studies showing short-term responses, this notion that creatine increases water retention over the long term has been widely accepted. So why do people experience this? Creatine is taken up into our muscles from our blood circulation by sodium-dependent creatine transporter. So this means for creatine to be transported in our muscles, it needs sodium. So water will also be taken up into our muscles to help maintain the intracellular osmolality. So just to keep the osmolality is a difficult word. And a number of exercise training studies, this is like up to 10 weeks, incorporating creatine supplementation have shown no increase in total body water. Doses in these studies were 3 to 5 grams a day. So if you have a high load again, the risk of water retention increases. There are several other studies suggesting it does not alter total body water, whether it's in our cells or not, relative to muscle mass over longer periods of time. As a result, we can say that creatine supplementation may not lead to water retention. So we just busted a myth. Let's go with the next one.
The next one I'm going to go with one of the most things that I hear is creatine is an anabolic steroid. People think of creatine like they think of like testosterone or any of the bodybuilding supplements, that they're just going to get big and ripped and covered in muscles. So first we need to kind of define, to bust this myth, what is an anabolic steroid? So an anabolic steroid, or they're synthetic versions of testosterone, and they could also be testosterone. Testosterone is a naturally occurring androgenic, meaning muscle building hormone that's produced both in males and females. So yes, women, you do need testosterone. It's at a lower level, but you still need testosterone. Most people take anabolic steroids in conjunction with resistance training for the intent of enhancing muscle mass and strength. And this increases due to muscle protein synthesis. So you build more muscle because of these anabolic steroids. Creatine is not an anabolic steroid. As Nilhan explained earlier, creatine works to increase ATP, so i.e. energy productions. That means that your muscles and your brain, where creatine is used, can do more work. So creatine supplementation can increase ATP and increase energy production during your exercises. So you have the possibility of increasing muscle power, the repetitions you can do, the volume you can do, which can sequentially contribute to increased muscle performance and muscle growth over a course of a training period. So basically they are similar in outcomes, but the mechanism of action and even the legal categorization of anabolic steroids being illegal and creatine is legal is a difference, and definitely not the same thing. Nilhan, what would be your next most common myth you think we should bust?
I counted, and you maybe said muscle 20 times. So the next myth is about if creatine is only useful to building muscle. So contrary to popular belief, it's not only beneficial for those looking to build up muscle. There are some additional benefits of creatine, which are, I think, all are science-based as well, based on research that should be also taken into consideration by athletes. So first of all, we talked about its use in energy metabolism. So it boosts athletic performance. It also acts as a pH buffer in tissues. So it can also help with, for example, lactic acid buildup. It can increase lean muscle mass. So, of course, this is what we discussed many times. It can help with speeding up the recovery. One of the most important, I think, that maybe stands out from different supplements, it also boosts cognitive function. So it's protecting your brain. It has some antioxidant properties. It hydrates muscle cells by increasing water retention within muscles. This is a side effect, but it's also a benefit at the same time. It can also help delay muscular fatigue. Research also shows very impactful use of creatine, helping with the traumatic brain injury and post-stroke and in brain concussions. So these are also very important effects of creatine on athletes. It can also help support with aging populations for their health, wellness, and performance. It can also help with specific female health features in terms of wellness and performance throughout the lifespan of a female. We are going to get into the use of creatine in not just a certain population or certain athlete group. So this takes us to our next very common myth. I usually hear when I suggest creatine to women or to aging athletes whom can really benefit from creatine, the general belief is that it's not good for them, but isn't creatine only for young men? Is this true, Jess?
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like most people only believe that creatine is beneficial for young men, and it is actually beneficial for almost everybody. older adults, I've started using this in a lot of my older population because older adults can definitely benefit from creatine supplementation. It's interesting because as you age, you have there's a condition called age-related sarcopenia. And basically, sarcopenia is the progressive and generalized skeletal muscle condition where you decrease muscle mass, strength, and functionality. I think most people think of this as just general aging. But the more muscle mass you lose as you age, the higher likelihood of adverse outcomes to having a fall, having fractures, physical disability, and even mortality. A lot of people will tell you that muscle mass is one of the key currencies for longevity. And I truly believe that. So adding creatine to an older population can be very beneficial in helping decrease this progressive general muscle wasting that you see often as patients age, and they just accept it as an aging one. Also, in the older population, you can see some benefits of creatine on aging bone. So there's been emerging research over the last decades that shows some benefits of creatine supplementation. There was a recent study of males over the age of 50 who were supplemented with creatine and performed whole body resistance training for 10 to 12 weeks. And they did a DEXA scan, which is a way to measure your bone density, and found an increase in the upper limb mineral content and a reduction in the amount of bone being broken down compared to the patients that weren't on the creatine. So that was just a short study. And usually with most people, we do recommend creatine and resistance training. There was also a more recent, longer study, 52 weeks, I believe, that was where the patients did, again, resistance training and creatine, and there was a decrease in bone mineral loss in the hip region compared to the placebo. And this was done in postmenopausal women. So postmenopausal women are at a huge risk already for fractures due to the loss of estrogen. So if you can support it by adding creatine to help prevent bone fractures, that would be a huge win for postmenopausal women. There is a little bit of kinetics, so how creatine is metabolized and how it works, that varies between males and females. They believe there is a little bit of research lacking in females just in general, because in general scientific research lacks in females, especially female athletes. But females, they believe, have higher intramuscular creatine concentrations because they have less skeletal muscle mass. So it's just more concentrated. So potentially the higher resting intramuscular creatine concentrations in females may help explain why some of the research shows diminishing responsiveness and performance effects in females, but it still doesn't mean that it doesn't have benefits. Also, it's been found that females have a lower amount of creatine in their brain. So using supplementation can be very beneficial in reducing symptoms they found in studies of depression and traumatic brain injuries. This would also be concussions. Females are at a higher risk of concussions than males and have usually worse outcomes. So adding creatine as the brain protective measure can be very beneficial due to females having lower levels of creatine and higher risk of concussions and depression. So I think we can safely say that creatine can be beneficial in almost in males and females and younger and older athletes. Wouldn't you kind of agree with me, Nilhan?
It's basically everyone. And,
everybody.
It's basically everybody. And I think it looks like creatine is a magical, powerful compound, which is available in our body. Just reminds me of something that needs to be mentioned. If you're a vegetarian, vegan, I think it's also important to consider because that the recommended daily intake may be low for those people and they may be missing out from these benefits. So it's just a thought for supplemental strategy, not just spontaneously. It's not a myth.
I think we probably do need to address the myth or just the information on creatine causing kidney and liver damage, especially if we're recommending an older population or many people. I know people get concerned about the myth of creatine that it causes kidney and liver damage. Do you want to kind of break that one down a little bit for us?
Of course, this myth also may be linked to creatine being considered to be an anabolic steroid, perhaps. Yeah. So let's break this. So there are questions and concerns involving creatine supplementation and kidney damage, renal dysfunction. These are very common. So in terms of pervasive misinformation in the sports arena that we see in supplement usage, the notion that creatine supplementation leads to kidney damage, means renal dysfunction, is perhaps second only to the myth that protein supplementation and high protein intake can cause kidney damage. So it's been more than 20 years of research, and this research on creatine demonstrates that there are no adverse effects from recommended dosages of creatine supplements on kidney health. And unfortunately, despite research, the concern persists. While the origin is unknown, the connection between creatine supplementation and kidney damage could be traced back to two things: either a poor understanding of creatine and creatine metabolism, or a case study that was published in 1998. That's a long time ago, and it has been very persistent, I guess, the results amongst the athletes and the population. So some believe it might be the research that we mentioned. It might be based on the idea that kidneys are damaged when blood creatinine levels rise. So creatinine is a byproduct of the phosphocreatine system. In our skeletal muscles, both creatine and phosphocreatine are degraded non-enzymatically to creatinine, which is exported to the blood and then excreted in the urine. Healthy kidneys filter creatinine, which would otherwise increase in the blood. So blood creatinine levels can be used as a proxy marker for kidney function. So you might have a blood test and you may see that this is, I think, a regular checkup for an athlete's health. Blood creatinine levels are always tested. It's a reflection of the kidney function. However, the amount of creatinine in the blood is related to the muscle mass. So if you have more muscle mass, you're going to have more creatinine. Yet, we don't adjust the reference ranges for someone's body or muscle mass. So I'm different, you're different, everybody is different, but there is one single range to measure creatinine levels. So that's why also important athletes need to take into consideration of their conditions when they go to a blood test, or they should also inform their healthcare professional that they are an athlete. So you could have two people that have identical kidney functions, but if one person trains and that has more muscle, even though the kidney function is the same, the person who is an athlete will have higher creatinine. It's because of the muscle mass. So more muscle, more creatinine. Creatine also increases after training. So if you're exercising, do the blood test maybe 2 days later, like 48 hours later. This is an incorrect result if you have higher creatinine. And creatine supplementation also increases creatinine levels. So you should also avoid going for a blood test after using supplements. So it's also recommended to give a break of your supplements. In fact, a study even gave individuals a hefty 20-gram dose of creatine monohydrate for a week, and there were no significant changes in renal activity. So this means no impact on kidneys. Unless you have a pre-existing kidney problem, there is little reason to believe that creatine supplementation will damage your kidneys. So it's important to know what your health status are in terms of your kidneys, your liver, and then also avoid getting blood tests after a heavy, intense exercise or using supplements such as creatinine. This may result in incorrectly. So we talk about hefty doses. Another large dose myth needs to be busted. And this is about creatine. So I'm giving the mic back to you, Jess.
I would say one of the next myths I hear often is that you have to take creatine with large doses of sugar to be absorbed. And as we kind of discussed earlier, creatine, especially creatine monohydrate, is relatively really well absorbed on its own. Like 99% of that is being put into your body. And you don't really need the extra sugar to get the benefit. There is some information showing that if you did take a large dose of sugar, so over 100 grams of carbohydrates, that can cause an increased rate of creatine uptake because it's mediated by like by the insulin and the blood sugar spike. But for all practical purposes, and you're going to get 99% of that creatine into your body, and there is no reason that you need to take a lot of sugar in order to just get that creatine absorbed. So my recommendation on creatine is whatever you do, take it consistently and take it any time of day. The other one I hear a lot is kind of related to nutrition is, can I just eat more meat to get creatine? And no, that you could, but I don't think most people could eat enough meat, or you would probably be sick to your stomach. Even though meat has creatine in it, there's a small amount. There's only such a small amount, and you would have to consume like pounds of meat and therefore lots of calories in order to get a full dosage, which is about 5 grams a day. So although creatine is found in food, especially beef and meats, the amount that you will need to consume daily to achieve the benefits is just not possible. So that is why most people do recommend supplementation. And again, back to if you're vegan or vegetarian or don't eat a lot of meat, then creatine supplement is going to be a must since you're not getting it through your normal diet. Nilhan, what are your thoughts on having to take creatine before or after a workout for the effect? I know that's one we get a lot of questions about.
Yes. So although exercise appears to enhance creatine buildup in muscles with the supplementation, evidence supporting the importance of timing of the creatine supplementation around exercise. Is it before? Is it during exercise? Is it after exercise? Is currently limited to only a few studies. So looking at the research, existing data are somewhat contradictory, likely due to differing supplementation protocols, which sample population has been researched in that study, what is the training protocol. So it's hard to do a standardization in order to give a clear answer to this timing. But again, that's when there is uncertainty, that's where the myths come from. So we wanted to help the athletes. So as it stands, adapting creatine timing specifically according to when training is performed is not currently supported by solid evidence. So it's not a real concern for now. For that reason, we need more well-controlled studies to understand whether the timing of creatine supplementation truly influences the increase in muscle creatine content, and its ergogenic effects are required to substantiate any such claims. So bottom line, you can use creatine any time of the day, before your exercise, after this. We are going to need more studies. As soon as they come up, we are going to share it with you. But for now, it's not a concern for when to take it. So we talk about when to use it. How about how much to use, Jess?
Yeah. So a question I get often, or a myth, is that, the creatine that you get in your pre-workout, a lot of people take a pre-workout that says has creatine. Is that enough? And most of the time, no, that's not enough. You have to be really good consumer and know how much exactly creatine is in your pre-workout. but most creatine or most pre-workouts I've seen contain much less than 3 to 5 grams. They have a couple hundred milligrams or just a little bit in, even though they have it in it, it's just not at the correct dose. So it is a little bit about being a well-educated consumer, knowing the dosage you need to take. Even though it's in it, it may be suboptimal. So I usually recommend getting separate creatine as a supplementation to make sure you're getting that 3 to 5 grams. Another thing to consider in this is in your pre-workouts are often stimulus based. So caffeine, like in our first episode, and the benefits of creatine might be negated if you have a high amount of caffeine in your pre-workout. This kind of goes back to the science behind the process of phosphocreatine and how everything is recycled. There is only a few studies that show that the impacts of high caffeine and creatine may negate each other. So until there's more data, I would recommend not having it in your pre-workout, or if you have it in your pre-workout, great, but adding additional supplementation and taking it away from pre-workout just in case there is an effect of caffeine on your absorption of that. So the other myth that kind of goes along with that is that creatine has to be front loaded, or what people call mega dosing. And I think you can kind of gather from this podcast so far, we've talked about that mega dosing is basically adding oral creatine for about 5 to 7 days in dosages of 20 to 25 grams per day. Some people will do that as smaller servings of like 4 to 5 times during the day, 5 grams each serving. But most people don't need this loading phase. What they found is basically it gets your levels higher quicker, but it doesn't produce any additional benefits. So for most people, in order to avoid side effects and feeling a little bit extra puffy on that loading phase, I usually just have patients and follow the guidelines of 3 to 5 grams per day, and your supplementation. That dosing strategy has been well established throughout scientific literature to increase your muscular creatine stores and shown to have greater improvements in muscle mass, performance, and recovery. So that's usually kind of my recommendation. What are your thoughts on creatine and needing to be cycled, Nilhan? Because I know we talked about loading and not really needing loaded, but what about like starting and stopping and that?
Yeah, there are very few supplements, especially that are over the counter, stand to benefit from cycling usage. So this means on and off, giving a break. Creatine is not one of them. In fact, creatine should be taken consistently, as you mentioned earlier, since it exerts most of its benefits once a saturation point has been established. So if you want to keep your body saturated with creatine, that's where you are going to get its benefit. And this leads to a question. It's not a myth, but whether there are situations in which creatine should be discontinued. So we talked about kidney and liver functions. So if you have any existing conditions such as your kidney, your liver, you have, for example, a heart failure risk, because creatine may lead to water retention in the first periods of its use. Whether you're pregnant or you're lactating, these may be the conditions you have to consult to your healthcare professionals and consider giving a break to creatine. Other than that, it doesn't need to be cycled. There is one aspect talking about discontinuation. That's a different angle. But I think also athletes should take great care in the context of the purity of creatine supplementation. Analytical tests must prove their composition. And if safety is not assured, you should discontinue. So that's why we always recommend third-party testing, which is not always the best way. But you can always consult your pharmacist to check whether it's a safe and quality product for you. Is there any issues around the use of children or adolescents? Because we have younger athletes or their parents that may be listening to our podcast.
Yeah, I get that question a lot about when can your kids start, when can they start creatine supplementation? And a lot of people thinking that creatine and even weight training is harmful for adolescents. So we'll kind of go into the myth of creatine is harmful for children and adolescents. We know that there's an overwhelming majority of evidence in the adult population that indicates creatine supplementation, both short-term and long-term, is safe and well tolerated. But the question of whether or not it holds true for children and adolescents is still unclear. And a lot of that has to be due to the fact that there are not many studies done on children and adolescents. And if you look at clinical trials, oftentimes you don't see the studies on kids. It's for 18 and older. So there's just not a lot of evidence out there. But from a clinical perspective, creatine supplementation has been found to potentially offer health benefits with minimal adverse effects in the younger population. There was a study done on traumatic brain injury related outcomes in children and adolescents who received oral supplementation of creatine. And they did it on like a milligram per kilogram per day dose for these kiddos for 6 months. And the neurological benefits that the patients received were astounding. The kids definitely on the creatine had a much better outcome. This can also be kind of related to using creatine in the younger population, especially in those used in collision sports, which have an underlying risk of concussions. Concussions are a form of a traumatic brain injury. So adding creatine to those kiddos, it may seem some benefits and protective effects. Some of the strongest supporting evidence, at least here in the U.S., is that creatine recently was classified in 2020 by the United States FDA as recognized generally safe and effective. So I do think that parents can, I usually go along the lines of if the kid is old enough and into weight training and or collision sports, that's creatine supplement would be something to consider with those kids, and that it is recognized as generally safe for kiddos. So Nilhan, what are your thoughts on kids and creatine to kind of summarize up our podcast today?
Well,
we busted some myths.
Yes, we busted 12 myths today. Thanks for busting the last myth. And as we delved into the fascinating world of creatine today, we explored some truths behind 12 myths surrounding its use in athletes, younger athletes, adult athletes, males, females, athletes from all walks of life.
Yeah.
That's what creatine is for. And where we discovered that creatine is not just a tool for muscle development, but it's a versatile supplement with a range of benefits. It can improve cognitive function. It can enhance endurance. Creatine has proven itself as a valuable ally for athletes striving to reach their full potential.
As sports pharmacists, it's our mission to provide you with accurate and evidence-based information to optimize your health and performance. Remember, when it comes to your supplementation choices, consult with your physician or pharmacist, prioritize your safety, and always make informed decisions. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more valuable insights in our next episode.